Who better to prevent World War V than a ragtag group composed of an old military man, a bleeding RPI, a cynical medical doctor, an armored rebel, and a killer for hire druid? Probably quite a few folk, but we make do with what we've got. Welcome to Tactical Breach Wizards. Tactical Breach Wizards is a 2024 turn-based tactics video game. Why do I feel like crying about the silly Wizards simulator? Made by Suspicious Developments, developers of Gunpoint and Heat Signatures, two other games with a penchant towards unconventional uses of Windows, so much so that the trio is called the Defenestration Trilogy. Seeing that they made Gunpoint really took me back, as I have very vivid memories of watching my older brother play it on his brand new laptop, and not being the best at it really. Tactical Breach Wizards took almost 7 years of making, with trailers dating as far back as 2019. Part of the long development process was that the game first started off as just a simple idea, cops but they're wizards, and then went through a lot of iterations, and had to suffer the quarantine. You control a team of wizards who fight against, a lot of people really, but mainly a PMC called Reactor, and a religious dictatorship. Oh, and the cops a few times, but that's fucking awesome. Part of that long development was also that this is Suspicious Development's first foray into 3D. Tactical Breach Wizards, which is a mouthful to repeat this many times, so I'll be saying TBW or Tabois from now on, is very stylized with its flat colors, simpler models, and lack of facial animations. This lack of facial motion does not hamper characterization, as the bodywork, dialogue, and camera work carry that part of the storytelling. The reveal of the fire in the Rushwater PD was a good comedic beat. Due to the lack of voice acting, a lot of the storytelling is done in this back and forth, text bubble chatting style, along with the rarely used stage directions. Every major player has a distinct color associated, which lends a sense to a few funny lines and situations, especially with that dunce, Steve Clark, Traffic Warlock. Steve Clark's dichotomy, hey, look at my big words, lends itself perfectly to the game's central bit. The inclusion of magic and magical things clashes with the modern military aesthetic in a way to create a visual tension that is always comedic without mocking itself. Zan's assault staff or Liv's wand with a silencer are staples of the game's goofy art style and a world building that is silly to us but never played for in-world laughs. More on that later. They also all carry very notable sound effects, which leads me to... The combat sounds are meaty. Each weapon has a recognizable sound that really gives character to who's using it. The typewriter effect when text appears actually helped my ADHD brain to focus on the words rather than the visuals or something else. Honorable mention to Dal, whose charge and sensor slam sound as though she is turning the poor chump, or chumps with the right upgrades, into chunky salsa. Dishonorable mention to the grunts that target those in line of sight, as their gun feels a little hollow, handing a little too sharply and feeling more like a smack across the cheeks than a weapon putting a hole in my plate carrier. The music leans a little more unremarkable, but in a way I didn't mind. In a game where you might be on the same segment for minutes at a time, pieces with too much energy might start to feel like an ice pick to the eardrum, or get turned into white noise that gets lost in the background. Especially since the game encourages replaying with its costume and unlocking confidence rewards. The score avoids repetition fatigue by enhancing the situations and giving clear characters to the landscape they accompany. The whole thing has this military texture, which yes I know is surprising given the title, and an intrigue vibe that really immersed me into the world and made me feel as though I was alongside the bumblefucks struggling to fight a fight far grander than myself. The game is built around small rooms with a set of enemies and hazards, which create a sort of fluid puzzle that seems to have a set solution, but that you can solve any way you like as long as the list at the top left of the screen is fulfilled. The moment-to-moment gameplay is cut into 3 pieces. The action phase, where you can move to your heart's content, as long as it's within your allotted speed, and take actions as you'd like, so long as they don't have an action cost, or worst, cost you mana, which is fairly tight when you start off. Next, in the 4C phase, the bad guys get to attack and throw their effects, and if they can't, well, tough tits. This point is skipped, and straight onto the moment where they declare moves and declare actions, and where you cannot rewind back to other pieces of the timeline. Thus, the cycle restarts. This game format came about as a way to address issues the game's creator, Tom Francis, had with XCOM 2. according to an interview with PC Gamers. I'm personally a big fan of XCOM 2's, and some of the point I do agree with. For example, a lot of XCOM 2 suffers from very unclear line of sights and unpredictable enemy arrivals, which TVW does not suffer from, thanks to very clear art style and smaller rooms with a controlled arrival of the enemies. This stands very much in contrast with XCOM 2's massive battlefields and gigantic maps. The included rewind button might seem like a get out of jail free card, but it enables the enemies to be more capable and powers to be more potent, as you get to be very careful in how you approach. A Nito Babito, thank my friend Box for this one, aspect of the gameplay is that there are very few attacks that deal damage outright. For a large part of the game, you can only deal enough direct damage to kill an opponent maybe once every 2 turns. The vast majority of damage is dealt by knocking enemies into walls or, and it never ceases to be hilarious, out of various windows. Defenestration is a common trait in Suspicious Development's major releases, and of all the running gags for a studio to have, this is one I can fully approve of. The UI you see in this footage is now outdated, as they've updated the character portraits to more clearly show what resources are available, like movement allotment, action points, and if they have any mana available. There are few accessibility options available, like changing enemy targeting colors for readability and for colorblind folk. Though to be honest, I wish I had known about that earlier, as some of these maps made the translucent red a pain in the ass to see, in the chapel for example. Another advantage of the clear and flat 3D style, compared to something more realistic, is that while I would have liked to see some outlining options for those with lower vision, fewer accessibility options are required for readability, as textures and effects don't muddy the picture too much. One of my favorite aspects of the game is that gameplay conventions and features are diegetic. How come the party knows who's in the next room? The game would be way harder going just blind, but in-world is that Zan's got the ability to see into the future and scan the room before entering it. Why can you make decisions and then rewind them? No actions before the foresee phase actually happens in-world. It's all planning using foresight. The game is really reliant on its characters and themes to make the gameplay feel authentic and resonant, which brings me to what elevates the game from a good tactical puzzler and window durability testing game to something very memorable is the genuine heart and hilarious interactions between characters. I came into the game with the expectation that it wouldn't have any weight to anything, making light of everything. After all, it is a very silly premise. While the tone of the game is fairly light, the subject it broaches through the lens of silly goofy wizards is honestly very touching and emotionally resonant. Every character has very human struggles, addressing them in believable, genuine, and very sweet manners. There are a lot of jokes. They never feel like they are at the expense of anyone. They are born from the struggles and burden each of the characters carry, never punching down. An interesting thing Tabua does with its story is that while the central core parts of it are mandatory, although skippable if you hate fun and joy, a lot of character building and emotional depth can be avoided and arguably missed if you're not paying attention by being in a special section which lets you replay and explore the characters as they interact. Shout out to Banks and Rion, who have the most emotionally detached emotional talk. Look, I'm about to go into detail and gush about characters I love and explore some of those themes, so spoiler warning. I wholeheartedly recommend this game, even beyond the gameplay. Here's a timestamp on screen to jump past those spoilers and a silly PNG I found. It is now rotating. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe while we give some time for the skippers. Boo! Before we get started, none of these names are ever spoken in-game, so these are my interpretations of the names as a native French speaker. Zan Vesker, Navy Seer, is an old man, jaded by his work and overwhelmed by the visions of a war Liv seems to be starting. He's also an unreliable narrator. His trauma about failing the first mission we play through makes him lie to himself, and by extension us, as we have an exterior point of view that follows the characters. In his mind for most of the game, he chose to save the asset over Liv. The reality is, he froze, so caught up in his foresight and decision paralysis that he failed on all ends. With this new war brewing, and especially now that he has people around that he likes and cares about, he's terrified that he's going to freeze again, that he's going to fail when they need him. I think that this humanization and imperfect nature of a character that's both visually, with the long beard and pointy hat, and mechanically, since he's the character we control during the tutorial, designed as the mentor, The reliable and skilled leader goes a long way in making us care for an archetype that's often killed to raise the stakes once they've served their narrative purpose. Zan's anxiety dream is the only one where the relationship is actively negative for Zan. His dream self is a rude, aggressive, and belittling presence. This reflects partially the abusive mentality years of military service has put into him, as well as his own self-hatred for failing when he did. Jan's last-minute save is a sweet way of reminding him that he's not alone, nor is he a monster, just a man that failed and must do what he can to be better. His endings are either to finally retire to the countryside and live a peaceful life, or join in with Dal in the rebellion against the chapel. I chose for Zan to keep on the fight. He's capable and not quite in a place of settling down yet. His skills and knowledge save countless lives and help Dal finally break the chapel's hold on her country. Liv is a chronomancer, and when we first meet her, operative to the DSR. Her arc in craft is that she exists on a different timescale compared to everyone else, making her infinitely fast and agile. She shows off those abilities in the first mission, but also shows the critical flaw in her character. She has always been so far above the rest of the world that she cannot admit to herself that she's losing her grip, and she can't let Zan scan the room with his own abilities just a little longer to see if there's anything that could, let's say, suppress her powers and take her away. This is the failure at the heart of Liv's character, and part of why Zan is so troubled with his own failures. She loses Banks despite the fact that she requires her to keep living. Liv is in this an undefined manner, making her slow down. Do not believe that makes her an easy prey. The inability to give a moment's thought is how her armor begins to crack, going from an unstoppable force to a still deadly fighter, one the crew cannot yet beat in a one-on-one combat, though it's more like 1-on-4, but someone the party has to outwit by shoving Banks into her own death door. Ultimately, when Zan and crew meets her for the last time on the roof of the man and mines of Medil, she's fading, down to not even a tenth of her previous strength. Every step of the way, her overconfidence fails her because she refuses to see her own failures. In believing herself above it all, she brings herself and thus the PMC's plans down. She stands in contrast to the main crew, who all gain a lot from admitting to themselves and to the others their pains and failures, both mechanically, in gaining boons that enhance their ability, and emotionally, by opening themselves up to others. That humanizing and weakness as strength is part of what really captured my interest in this game. It's silly, challenging in parts. It's fun, but it's deeply human. Liv does technically have two endings as well. Either Banks, the team's necromedic, we'll get to it later, puts a real bullet in her and never revives her. That leaves her incapable of doing any more harm, but deeply wounds Zan, regretting her death. Her other endings is Banks still kills her, but revives her so she can face trial. This still burdens Zan. He gets the levity that there is still at least justice served. Jen Kellen is a Stormwitch private investigator and the heart of the crew, as well as its brain. She is shown to be highly capable in both crowd control and investigative work, as well as having a few years of military service under the DSR, which is how she knows Zan. Oddly enough, she's the only one we aren't given a direct story for her awakening in her craft, a usually extremely traumatizing event, and she's the only one that seems to carry a proper class name, so to speak. A lot of her character issues are about her insecurities and how she cares deeply for everyone else but can't seem to give herself that love, despite knowing she should. And interestingly, her anxiety goes unsolved in a direct manner. While typically in a narrative, she'd have a major breakthrough and be better for it, the story doesn't reward her for her anxiety and instead opens her mind to growth by doing something real and true to what she'd like herself to be. Someone capable of and willing to help those around her. Sure, a world-changing event's not the springboard she'd have hoped, but you make do with what you've got. Her endings are either to team up with Banks, whom she has a fairly interesting relationship and crush on, more on that in Banks' section, or work with Medil to find those missing in action from Liv's attempt at a takeover. I chose for her to take the second option because it felt right for her to try to save more life, or at least give the decency of rest to a lot more. And nothing stopping the two from becoming close roommates, living with the best boy Daryl, Jen's cat. I didn't have anywhere to mention this cat, but God, I love that guy. Dessa Banks is a necromantic, hard-ass, cynic, and the game's biggest subversion of tropes. She's a trained medical surgeon suffering from Strybeck syndrome, a fictional disease that is degenerative and causes the afflicted to suffer tremors. Dr. Banks was good enough to suppress it for a while until she accidentally killed a kid on her operative table. Her craft awakened when she begged and hoped the child would awaken. He did, physically sent back an hour in time. Banks decided to run away, not wanting to be turned into a test subject. Her main subversions is that while she is fulfilling the role of the healer for the crew's purposes, all her abilities cause some form of trauma, either physical or mental. The drugs she throws at enemies, poison. Her flying skull harms flesh, and Death's Door causes deep emotional scarring. Even her protection ability, Transference, requires a target to take on the damage received. Her main spell, Resurrect, requires the death of the target, and since most people use non-lethal means to capture target or out of a sense of morality in the crew's case, she carries a revolver to ensure the target's fucking dead. Banks also has an incredibly obvious crush on Jen, who is her mirror in every way. Jen is deeply caring outwardly, but scared that it is out of selfishness, while Banks keeps everyone at an arm's length while following them into the fires of war. Also the only characters to have a directly joint ending. Though characters work together in their endings, Jen and Banks are the only one that visually bind together. Her endings are to either join Jen in creating a private investigative agency, or open up her scam insurance agency. I mean, her Death Care Incorporated. I chose for her to open the insurance, as scamming billionaire is fun, and I felt she could fulfill that work from anywhere, and nothing stopped the pair from bunking up as good pals. You know, buddies, like best friends. Dal Sabine is an armored rebel, figurehead, mechanic, and no one to fuck with. She fulfilled the duties of the group's bruiser, a big, lean, charging machine, and the only one in the crew that have armor, reducing all incoming damage. She's also, in a surprising flip of the trope of the slow tank, about as mobile as Jen. The interesting emotional core of Dal's character is that she never wanted to be a rebel, at least not in the form that we see her in-game. The resolve, strength, and leadership she shows is something she had to learn after Jida, her husband, died in a police raid on her car shop. That event is how she awakened her craft, begging the world to strip her oppressor of the layers that protected him. Suddenly, she swapped with him. The riot priest turned into a fearful, sniveling mess before Dal, now clad in his armor, who killed him in rage. Dal is the least magical character of the crew. Her only magical effects, swap teleportation. All the effects you can add to her sensor, charge, and riot blocks are pure Kalani heft and mechanics. That woman topples weapons of war by shoulder checking them. The Chapel and Dal believe in chorism, a religion where the dead become a sort of godly spirit to be honored and listened to as a way to keep themselves going. The schism was caused by the differences in how the godly dead talk to their living. Dal and those in the rebellion believe that everyone, through proximity in life and practice of the faith, can talk to the deceased, to ask them questions, and generally keep loving. Death is only an aspect of life after all. To the Chapel, only those anointed can speak to the dead, and the dead speak as one, a pantheon. The recording we steal in the middle of Act 3 spells out that they are lying, stoking the flames of revolt even in the most moderate people of Kalan, and turning the tides in Dal's favor. Interestingly, her faith wavers when she's far from home. She realizes the world is far wider than the singular focus she gave her home of Kalan, and seems to struggle with her own place in both the story's central conflict and, as her endings show, her place in the rebellion she leads. Though after she has completed her work, she realizes that she is fully focused and able to hear her husband clearer than ever. Her two endings are to either retire to a tactical position in the rebellion, using what she'd learned with the crew as a way to lead and guide folk through the fight. I felt that this was not right for her. Her role as a figurehead and powerhouse, coupled with the new things she learned with her new friends, could let her break the hold on the Chapel, so she kept her position as a frontline fighter for the resistance. Her and Zan became close friends in the chosen endings, which made me smile. Rion, no last name given, druid, hitman, and shapeshifter, is an interesting role reversal of a trope, while being part of an already interesting trope reversal. Fantasy druids are typically isolationist, or at least avoidant of what it would be considered civilized. Uneasy history of those ideas aside, druids in Tiboa are an organized mafia that run much of the northern part of Medellin, where the game's final act takes place. Rion's shapeshifting is at first assumed to be from human to dog, and a simple part of his kit, which centers around weakening and pulling enemies. But during his anxiety dream, his dream self is the dog self, which might indicate that he's more attuned to the beast side of his abilities, It also alludes to a lack of trust and emotional distance from everyone, refusing to get close due to past abuse. Once again, the dream does not fix the character right away, but Rion opens himself to helping others, as one of the possible endings shows. Put a pin in that. During a quiet time, before the final attack on Liv's crew, Rion shares to Banks that he unlocked his craft when his father beat him, breaking an arm. He saw red, he was blinded with rage, but he was so young and knew little of violence. Thus, he became the only thing he knew could be so filled with hatred. He became human. In that form, he managed to choke out his abusive owner and kill him. As a dog, he's almost incapable of violence, only being able to bite the enemy by pretending they're playing. But as a man, he feels a deep well of anger within him. He stays human though. Due to the slower aging rate, he takes on the lifespan of the form he's in. And the human form makes it easier to go around places, as an unaccompanied dog tends to attract attention. His two endings were to either go even higher in the reactor chain of command, killing its CEO and making sure that it got dismantled, or follow the lead of the chapel leader and help the rebellion. I decided to have him hunt down the chaplain, as it felt like his way of keeping friends. You know, murder. Other characters tend to serve their narrative purpose with some insight of their personality through their actions, but it's clear that the main cast of characters is the central focus of the story, as we get such deep insight into what trouble, shackle, but ultimately propel them through the story. In conclusion, I purchased TBW on a whim, honestly, because it was on sale and Zan's assault staff made me laugh so hard I sent it to a friend. What I got out of that spontaneous purchase was one of my favorite games of 2024, and that's counting Balatro. Oh, yeah. Tactical Breach Wizards is great. It deserves your time, both as a mechanical piece of gameplay and as a piece of storytelling. Go out to your local Steam page and get it. I'll leave a link down in the description, as well as the socials and a secret link. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Leave a like. Please leave a comment if you have anything you'd like to see, you'd like to let me know, and share with your friends. Thank you so much. Goodbye.